I'm Joanna Small, the Public Information Officer for the Wheat Ridge Police Department. It's Friday, February 10th, 2023, and this is your WRPD Video Weekend Review. Here's a summary of some of the most notable incidents your Wheat Ridge patrol officers responded to over this past week or so, as well as a look back at some of the cases that our detectives could use your help in resolving. Overnight on February 9th, an unknown suspect fired 18 indiscriminate rounds from a handgun in the area of Newgate. The person was in a black Cadillac, which was located in an apartment complex nearby. No suspects were located, but the vehicle was towed and the investigation continues. There were no injuries and was no damage that officers could uncover after an extensive area canvass. Also on February 9th, an observant WRPD officer located a suspicious vehicle in the parking lot of a gas station off Kipling. Clearance of the temporary license plate revealed the owner of the vehicle had a felony warrant for his arrest. When the officer attempted to contact the driver, he told our officer to leave him alone, and then he sped off. The officer did not initiate a pursuit, but the investigation continued. He found a police report that included where the suspect worked and then located the vehicle that fled at that business. An employee of the business told our officer that the suspect was hiding inside another vehicle. He was contacted and arrested on the warrant, as well as issued a summons for the obstruction. On February 8th, a patrol officer conducted a traffic stop and found the driver had no valid license, no insurance, and no valid registration. The vehicle was towed for safekeeping, and the officer learned the driver also had a $100,000 dangerous drug warrant for his arrest out of Denver. He was transported to the Jefferson County Jail on the warrant. On February 7th, a woman was experiencing a diabetic emergency and drove into a Wheat Ridge business on Wadsworth, causing minimal damage. Fire officials arrived and blocked the vehicle in, and the driver, who was confused, backed into the fire truck. She was treated and released on the scene. On February 6th, an officer was conducting routine patrol in an area where we've seen an increase in criminal activity when she spotted a familiar vehicle typically driven by a man known to have a felony warrant. He's also categorized as a special offender due to deadly weapons. When the driver exited the vehicle, our officer identified him as the person with the warrant. He was immediately taken into custody and informed our officers he had a loaded handgun in his pants pocket. The suspect was transported to jail on his outstanding warrant and also faces charges for unlawfully carrying a concealed weapon. Also on February 6th, the officers were dispatched to the underpass at Kipling and I-70 for a report that there was a disturbance between a man and woman in which the man was allegedly beating her and the woman was screaming. The man then threw something at the 911 caller. When officers attempted to contact the suspect, he took off on foot. The female remained on the scene and eventually gave her true name to officers. It was discovered she had nearly a dozen warrants out for her arrest. She was transported to jail for booking on the warrants. Officers are aware of the man's identity. He also has warrants and will be arrested once he is successfully located. On February 5th, officers were called to an RTD bus on West 50th Place for reports that a teenager was passed out. Officers found him to be under the influence of a controlled substance as well as in possession, which was a violation of a protection order. He was transported to the hospital for treatment due to the amount of drugs in his possession, to include a large number of fentanyl pills. The case was also assigned to a WRPD detective. On February 4th, officers were sent to the 3800 block of Kipling for a report of a motor vehicle accident with property damage. When we arrived, we discovered the causing vehicle had struck a parked vehicle and that drugs or other substances were likely involved in this crash. The driver had trouble standing and admitted to officers that she had been drinking that night. She was transported to the hospital for treatment, and DUI charges are pending the outcome of a blood draw. Also on February 4th, an officer attempted to make a traffic stop in the area of West 44th Avenue in Kipling, but the driver of the vehicle refused to pull over. A short while later, a different officer was at eastbound I-70 near the off-ramp to Kipling when she observed that same vehicle. This time, the driver did stop. After identifying him, our officer learned his license was revoked and he was restrained by protection order from contact with a woman who was riding in the vehicle with him. He was jailed. On February 3rd, WRPD detectives began investigating an allegation of child abuse in which an infant who had originally been reported as choking was transported to the hospital with injuries that were more consistent with abuse, including broken bones and bruising. Due to the sensitivity of this crime, no further information will be released at this time. Sadly, officers responded to a second case of child abuse that same night. This incident involved an adult male who had a negative reaction to the methamphetamine and fentanyl he was smoking while his 5-year-old child was inside the house with him. He was transported to the hospital and issued a summons for the drug use. The child was placed with a safe relative, and the appropriate child protective services were notified. Again on February 3rd, officers found the driver of a vehicle passed out behind the wheel at 50th and Oak Street. He was so intoxicated that the driver had difficulty walking. Officers uncovered that he is a sex offender whose crime is against a child, and he has not been registered in months. The suspect was jailed for DUI and failure to register as a sex offender. Now here's a case that detectives could really use your eyes on, so we want you to take a look at your screen. On February 7th, we were called for a fraud report at 3600 Youngfield. Dispatch told our officers an employee had a counterfeit $100 bill that she confiscated from a customer who had attempted to use it to pay for merchandise. This is a surveillance image of that suspect. If you believe you recognize her, please call our investigative team at the number that's listed there on your screen. We also highlighted 2 other cases this week as standalone posts on our social media pages. The first involved a simple contact for shoplifting at one of our local businesses that turned into an arrest for child abuse and drugs. The suspect had an infant on the floorboard of her vehicle who was covered in drug residue as well as dangerous substances in her vehicle. The second was the arrest of a man who, over a 3-day period, terrorized several employees at different Lutheran Medical Center facilities. Each time, he used a knife and demanded privileged information. He was arrested Tuesday afternoon after attempting to flee on foot. WRPD patrol officers and detectives worked together to track the 33-year-old man to a neighborhood near the Lutheran campus and took him into custody. He's now facing 3 attempted aggravated robbery charges as well as a felony menacing charge. Additionally, between your calls for service, officers recovered 5 stolen vehicles, including 2 in which suspect information was developed and arrests were made. They issued approximately 53 traffic citations and made contact with people for lesser crimes such as trespassing that then resulted in arrests for warrants, drugs, and drug paraphernalia. That's all for now. We'll see you next time. And remember, if you need us, we are always just minutes away.